Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to News Dose. We are going back to a more normalized schedule after covering the Microsoft versus the FTC case last week. Of course, we're still anxiously waiting for the final decision from Judge Corley. Hopefully that will happen sometime this week. But in the meantime, there's a lot of things happening across the game industry, including, apparently, a new supposed discovery for the Nintendo Switch Successor. Some people now believe an announcement could be rather imminent. I don't really know about all that. I'm not quite as inclined to believe this, but we'll at least discuss why those Switch 2 rumors suddenly exploded over the weekend. Also, I want to touch upon a back and forth between Phil Spencer and Jim Ryan about keeping Activision content multi-platform. Apparently, Jim Ryan had quite a few demands if its acquisition does indeed go through. So we will get into all that plus plenty more. With that said, though, let's just go and jump right into our first topic of the day, being about Assassin's Creed Black Flag. And yes, you did hear that right. The 2013 entry, Assassin's Creed Black Flag. A remake might actually be in development according to Kotaku, which reported that a Black Flag remake is in early development with a heavy involvement from Ubisoft Singapore, the same studio currently behind the still not released Skull and Bones. I do kind of question if that game will ever release, and honestly, if it does, I don't really have a lot of hopes that it will actually be good, but I do, however, find a Black Flag remake to be interesting in the aspect, why Black Flag? I keep seeing that online. Why remake Assassin's Creed Black Flag instead of going back further in the series? Surely it would make more sense to remake the first game in the series, the one that got it all started off, or maybe even Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood, which are fan favorites. Well, I think the reason a Black Flag remake makes sense is just because Ubisoft Singapore has been working on Skull and Bones for nearly a decade, and it is a spin-off to, of course, Assassin's Creed Black Flag. They took those well-received naval battles and attempted to just kind of create a full-blown live service game from that particular idea. It's just, it's yet to come to fruition, but I do imagine that they've expanded on some of its gameplay quite a bit, and while I don't really have high hopes in Skull and Bones as a full-blown game, I don't think it's going to have some commercial success or anything like that, but what they could do is apply its new ideas in a remade Black Flag with updated visuals. In many ways, it might have come full circle, but, it would be a good way of making some of Skull and Bones' development actually worth it, even if that game turns out to be a failure. I think that would be a small victory, at the very least, for Ubisoft to just kind of scavenge that game and, get something out of Skull and Bones. Other than that, though, Black Flags is one of the more well-received Assassin's Creed games for that matter, so, hey, why not? Just kind of understand, though, is that if this report is true, it is still reportedly years away. Next up, though, unfortunately, bad news continues to hit Daedalic Entertainment, the studio behind The Lord of the Rings Gollum. I was actually rooting for this game just because I'd like to see some good Lord of the Ring games come out for fans of the series. We saw that happen with Harry Potter earlier this year. That was pretty cool to see. But unfortunately, Gollum, it did not do the same thing for Lord of the Rings games. Instead, though, it's lauded as one of the worst critically reviewed games of all times. Fans didn't seem to like it either. And, it just had all kinds of problems, both from a technical and a design standpoint. It's often described as simply just not a very fun game. And as you would expect, with all that, Gollum really failed to establish itself in the market, especially in a crowded market like we're seeing in 2023. There's a lot of competition out there. Even with all that, though, Daedalic did originally have plans to make another Lord of the Rings game, though that's no longer the case. Not only have they now decided to cancel it, but they've also decided to leave game development entirely. They reportedly laid off about 25 employees, which, that's never fun to hear about. My heart does go out for all those that have been impacted. And then for the rest of the studio, they're now going to shift their business over to game publishing instead. I think this kind of shows you the danger of failed game development. Daedalic, they've been making games since 2008, but with one high-profile flop like this, that's it for them as a game developer. The thing is that, sure, they could have tried their hands on another Lord of the Rings game as they were planning, but truthfully, with how bad Gollum turned out to be, I think it would be very difficult to advertise another Lord of the Rings game from the same studio. I can't imagine gamers would have been excited after a blunder like this, and it could have been brand damaging if something like this were to happen again. And I think with that, it's better to just go ahead and give the Lord of the Rings to a different studio. With that said, though, best of luck to Daedalic on their publishing efforts going forward. Okay, so let's go talk about this Jim Ryan and Phil Spencer email here, though. The two bosses, the X-boss and the PlayStation boss, coming together to email back and forth about Activision Blizzard. Now, a lot of things came to light last week as a part of the Activision Blizzard trial, but one of the most fascinating stories has centered around PlayStation. It's been well publicized that Sony, they're not exactly thrilled about this acquisition, and they refuse to sign a deal with Microsoft to keep Call of Duty multi-platform. But now we actually have some details as to why all of this is happening in the first place. And that's because Sony has some pretty steep demands. This was revealed in an email written by Jim Ryan back in May of 2022, where he responded to Phil Spencer saying that he wasn't happy with their proposal. Now, we'll get back to that here in just a second when we read Phil's response, but in a pretty lengthy response from Jim, and I'm going to try to paraphrase here as much as possible because this is a pretty long email, but he had 4 different terms to his counter proposal. So one, this includes price and content parity. Basically, all Activision games will continue to launch on PlayStation and remain equal with Xbox. Then 2, PlayStation Plus must be treated equal to Xbox Game Pass. According to Jim Ryan, unequal treatment for subscription services would lead to unequal availability for Activision games. Okay. Then 3 is that they'll remove any financial and marketing contracts that Activision and Sony previously negotiated. And then 4, and this is the last one. Now, this didn't seem like a demand, but really him just kind of pressing his luck, as he did say that he had very similar concerns with Bethesda content, and he wants to reapproach those discussions with Phil as well to bring Bethesda content back to PlayStation. Yeah, so that's a little strange to me, as is really much of this letter. These are honestly some pretty significant demands for first-party content that, Sony, I know for a fact, does not offer Xbox when they themselves acquire a studio. I mean, is Jim Ryan going to offer Spider-Man 2 to Xbox? Because, it would be right for gamers, as Jim Ryan kind of suggested here in this email. Of course not. Sony, they're a cutthroat publisher, and they've leveraged exclusives since, way back in the PlayStation 1 days. Just go and ask Sega all about that. The only difference here is that Microsoft has a whole lot more money than Sega, and Sony's kind of figuring it out the hard way after years and years of poking the bear, if you will. Now, to be fair here, it is different when you buy a publisher worth $70 billion, and I do understand that. Microsoft is kind of changing the rules here a little bit, but the reality of the situation is that Microsoft is paying $70 billion, and while it's not solely about exclusivity, they are willing to pay this amount with certain goals in mind. One is that they want to expand into mobile, but also, without a doubt, they're looking to accelerate the growth of Xbox Game Pass. This is one of their primary goals going forward. So that's where I kind of see an issue with Jim Ryan's counter proposal. I mean, you can kind of point to some other things, but he wants PlayStation Plus to be treated completely equal. Jim Ryan is basically asking for one of two things here. Either release Activision content on PlayStation Plus day one alongside Xbox Game Pass, or instead, don't do day one releases at all. I think that this just kind of goes to show you, and I think that this was already crystal clear in the first place, but Sony and Jim Ryan, they fear Xbox Game Pass. Them disputing this acquisition, I don't think has ever really been about exclusivities. They just don't want Microsoft to offer Activision content day one, because a lot of consumers might then choose to play on Xbox Game Pass instead of paying Sony that $70 price tag. So a lot more gamers could then switch over to Xbox because of that price difference. Now, is that bad for consumers though? Or is that just bad for Sony's business? And I think we kind of know the answer to that. In fact, Judge Corley even pushed back against Sony making some of these claims. As she said last week, maybe if Microsoft includes day one content like this in their service, it would, incentivize Sony to maybe improve their own service. So that could actually be viewed as pro-competitive as well as pro-consumer. Back to the email, though, Phil Spencer, after 3 months, did finally respond to Jim Ryan's counter-proposal, and here's what he said. I continue to stand behind the written agreement I sent you on January 31st of 2022 with my signature memorializing our commitment to Sony. The agreement would keep all existing Activision console titles on Sony, including future versions in the Call of Duty franchise or any other current Activision franchise on Sony through December 31st, 2027. That includes content and feature parity, as well as making it clear that we would not feature any timed exclusive releases of such content on Xbox consoles. It is hard to align these principles set out in your email of May 26, 2022 with Sony's leading role in the market. As I said before, we believe that keeping these titles on Sony, as we did with Minecraft, is the right thing for the industry and for gamers. Phil. So he did decline Jim Ryan here, and this is why Sony has yet to sign that contract. They want more. But I do think that Phil's response is quite interesting because it is packed with a lot of details unsaid. The way Phil responded, while it sounds like all current existing Activision franchises will be multi-platform until 2027 outside of World of Warcraft, because that's not on Sony's platform, there is, however, that question of what happens after that date. Now, Call of Duty obviously will remain multi-platform, as has been said time and time again. But what about other franchises like Crash Bandicoot, Diablo, and Spyro? There's not really the same guarantee with other IP, or at least from what I can see here, and there's also no mention of new IP for that matter. That's something that Microsoft could use to their advantage. But one thing that I do think is clear is that Phil is looking to accelerate Xbox Game Pass's growth. As he notes, Sony's the market leader, and Xbox does need to compete. So from their back and forth here, that seems to be where the holdup is between the two. Sony fears Xbox Game Pass, and they do not like the idea of day one Activision Blizzard content in Xbox Game Pass. Now, moving on, though, we do also have a pretty wild Nintendo story to talk about, because those Switch Successor rumors have hit an all-time high over the weekend, to the point there's been a lot of speculation that an announcement could happen as early as this month. Now, I would say that you might want to go and hold up on those rumors, because what's happening here is that a Twitter user by the name of Nash Weedle claimed that a Nintendo Switch 2 dev kit has reached a Spanish studio, and that this is apparently somehow an indication that they're in the phases for a final presentation of the console. Now, the reason people are latching onto this rumor the way they've been is because Nash Weedle back in 2020 did accurately leak Metroid Dread before its official release. Of course, Metroid Dread was announced and released a year later. So with one accurate leak online, maybe they do in fact have some inside information. That seems to be the line of thinking with this specific leak. For that matter, earlier this year, Nash Weedle claimed Nintendo and Mercury Steam has another 2D Metroid in development, which, I think is plausible. And now here we are with them claiming a dev kit is in Spain. Well, Mercury Steam is located in Spain, so there is a link. All of these leaks do surround a very specific studio, so is it possible that this person does have some inside information that Mercury Steam got a Switch 2 development kit? Well, I think at least that part is realistic. Hypothetically, if any of these claims are actually true, well, that would mean that Mercury Steam is a Nintendo partner, and with that, they would likely receive a development kit early. But that right there is the key word here. Early. Now, I'm not even saying that Nash Weedle was correct in the first place. I'm not going to predict whether that person is right or wrong. But what I am saying here today and now is that a dev kit is not a sign of an imminent announcement, as some have kind of run with online. It's no secret that developers get dev kits well ahead of its release, even a year ahead of release, especially partner studios. And if we're under the assumption that Mercury Steam is actually working on a new Metroid game right now, then yeah, there's a good chance that they would have an early dev kit in hand. But as for it releasing soon, that right there's the question. No, that's not what this means at all. In reality, it's still just as likely going to be released in 2024 as I fully suspect it is. Again, developers get dev kits well ahead of release. I don't know, though. I mean, I just find the speculation around this to be absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, yes, I could be wrong here, but why is it that some people believe that Nintendo, for whatever reason, wouldn't announce a Switch successor at their Direct last month, just a couple weeks ago, actually, but just 1 month later, it's suddenly a realistic announcement? Yeah, I'm not buying this leak whatsoever. I'm still predicting 2024. Let's go take a look at the poll of the day, though, where I asked you all, would you have preferred Microsoft to acquire Sega or Activision Blizzard? We did learn about this last week, that Microsoft heavily considered Sega as an acquisition target, and as you can see here, most of you all do prefer Activision Blizzard. And I think with what Xbox is trying to achieve, I do think that it makes the most sense for them. Sega has some really good IP like Sonic and Yakuza. You all know how I feel about Yakuza, one of my favorite single-player IP ever made. But Microsoft, they probably need a bigger splash than that to achieve what they want. And with the wealth of IP Activision Blizzard has, they certainly will get that, but also from a mobile perspective. They've talked a lot about mobile in this acquisition and how that's a big part of their future, and well, King does offer a lot of expertise there as well. So just in terms of what makes the most sense for Microsoft, I'll go and go with ABK here because I do think it's the perfect acquisition for them. Though I do kind of wonder if they would have acquired Sega instead. Would that have been maybe easier to acquire? Here we are a year and a half later with ABK, and, you know, it's still up in the air. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode. But if you liked the video, don't forget to bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.